This is the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust meeting. It's Thursday, May 12, 2022. It is 1:34 p.m. and we will start with a call to order by roll call. Linda Escobedo.
Here.
Mike Lawson.
Here.
Rich Feely.
Here.
Carrie LaFleur informed me that she would not be able to attend today, so Carrie's absent, and Keith Bergman present. All right, so we have four out of our full 5 members, so we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes, and I had sent out a draft set from our last meeting, which was held on April 14, 2022. And I wonder if we have a motion on those minutes.
Move to approve it.
Okay, so Linda, motion to approve. I will take Rich as the second. Is there any discussion? All right, let's take a vote on the motion to approve those minutes. Linda?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
And Keith? Aye. So those are approved 4-0. Thanks all very much. Next item is May 2022 annual town meeting recap, affordable housing articles. And I thought this might be an opportunity for us just to talk about how we think the things went on the articles that dealt with affordable housing, which I'd say are in 2 categories: the money articles, 24, 25, and 26, which successfully funded our budget for another year and approved the Assabet River Bluff land acquisition, among other things. And the other sort of housing article on the warrant was zoning, Article 33, in particular, Thorough Depot, which our committee did not take a position on, although we did have comments on that article. So I'll be delighted to hear feedback from folks. But first, I want to thank and single out Linda Escobedo for the presentation that she made on Article 24, the Affordable Housing Development Funding at town meeting, relieving any of us of the need to go into great detail at all, because it was all covered, and it was so great to see that information there, and then quickly followed by the report from the Finance Committee in support. I'll get to their report in a minute, but I did want to thank Linda for carrying the ball for us at town meeting, and appreciate that effort very much, and you're guiding us, your stewardship of all these housing groups. You're the official cat herder for housing. Yeah. So thank you, Linda.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those comments. And you know, it certainly is credit to everyone on the committee too, in terms of all the pre-discussion that went on related to that. And Keith, you're a great closer when you said, look, if we don't have the money, we can't proceed. I thought that did it.
Right. Well, thanks very much. Yeah, I was looking for, since you'd covered everything, when I did grab the microphone, I was trying to think what one thought can I leave them with, and that's exactly it. That we can be nimble and take advantage of opportunities as they arise, but only if there's money in the fund. So it was gratifying to hear.
But you know, but also real credit to everybody who worked on Article 25. You know, extraordinary, and I think the Land Trust and their affiliate organization, did an incredible job on all of that. And, what was interesting, and it's been interesting since that meeting, is to hear comments from people. And I think even that night we heard them to our detriment in another way, but, comparing the multiple entities being able to work together to accomplish both the open space and the housing. And, that particular evening at town meeting, that same positive attribute was used against us on Article 33. Why can't all the entities work together? But post the town meeting, I certainly have heard a number of comments about, how terrific it was that so many different groups could meet together. Now, it wasn't a perfect process, and I, for one, learned a lot from it, watching where we had some gaps, and we'll try to keep that in mind going forward. But all in all, I think it was pretty terrific.
Thanks. Mike, did you?
No, I was very pleased by that. Particularly pleasing because it was such a joint effort with so many people involved in it. It was really quite gratifying.
Thanks. Rich, did you have some comments?
No, other than thanks to everybody. And, I think it shows that there's more affordable housing support in those who go to town meeting than we often recognize, which I thought was good. And, I think we need to find a way to capitalize on that and still do something at Thorough Depot. But no, I'm very glad it went the way it went.
Right. And there's Mike. Hey, there he is in video as well as audio. So that's great. I wanted to mention just a couple of things, and I think I'll include the comments in our meeting minutes, because I think there's something that we'll want to be able to refer back to. But I made it a point of going back and listening and even transcribing the Finance Committee's remarks delivered by Ray Andrews on Article 24, because it wasn't quite what I found in printed versions, but I nevertheless thought it was instructive for us. And as we go forward, that express the concern that we're aware of the continuing reliance on free cash. And FinCom did applaud the guidelines that were recently established by the trust, and look forward to the updating of those guidelines, for which they're looking to have goals around the number and type of housing to be converted or created, as well as the associated unit cost, and recommend annual reporting to town meeting of the sources and uses of trust funds. And I thought that, number one, I'm grateful for the FinCom's vote of support this year, point one. Point two is, I certainly hear those concerns that they're raising. For me, I think the opportunity for us to have more specific guidelines is for any discussion of the number and type of housing to be converted or created, and associated unit cost. I, for one, would like to see those things raised by the housing production plan. So it's not, it's nothing specific about the powers of that or the clairvoyance of this committee. I think we have the opportunity exists through the updating the housing production plan to try to look at specifically what housing production goals might be. So I think that would be my first thought about how to address that, is to make sure that it gets raised in the housing production plan process. The other comment about recommending annual reporting to town meeting on the sources and uses of trust funds, great idea, that we can we can include that specifically in our future town reports and any information that we share with the rest of town government and with the community. So, but I thought that those were thoughtful comments. I understand where they're coming from, and I wanted to acknowledge them. The other comment that I wanted.
Keith,
Yeah,
excuse me, before you move on, I would be interested if there's any reaction to that.
No, I think the only question I have is, are we gonna have to keep track on the back of an envelope? Or can Carrie set up subunits in the town accounts so we know where it came from and where it went? I mean, I think it's a very fair request. I just, we ought to have a system for doing it, particularly if we ever get serious money from a transfer fee.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it's something that we can do. We are sort of doing it on the back of an envelope now, but but our funding sources are few. It's the town and the town meeting itself, along with the one gift that's been donated to the trust fund. But I think those that information on the sources and uses of trust funds can certainly be something that the town administration can help us on. Mike?
I would be more than happy to sort of set up for us a chart of accounts and, just have it be a running sources and uses statement that we can just continuously update. And I can go back to the creation of it, I think, could pretty easily bring us to today or whenever it is Carrie's going to actually transfer the money into the trust. So I think that might be a good record keeping thing for us to do.
That would be great, because I'm sure the town folks have a lot to do, and that would be great.
Yeah, Mike, do you have the most recent copy that Rizzo's done on the back of the envelope, so to speak?
I don't think I do. If you've got it, could you send it along?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well, that sounds great.
Keith, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but before you leave this topic, I agree with you about the housing production plan being the right vehicle to address the issue brought up about the number of units, for housing. I'm always a little sensitive to that request in that format. And I do think the housing production plan is the vehicle, but I hope the housing production plan is careful about how they address this issue. And let me tell you what's on my mind. Some of that is being, we've heard this before in other issues related to the affordable housing. And some of it is trying to limit any production beyond meeting the threshold. So that's one statement I'll make. And so, that's a concern, because I think at least some of the other town responses we've gotten from citizens is that we need more affordable housing at a variety of ranges of affordability, both capital A and small a. So how that gets interpreted and presented going forward, even through the housing production plan as the vehicle, I think is really key and very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of. Now, I don't know if everyone agrees with me on that, but
yeah, I think it's a great point. And when you look at if you just look at our guidelines and look at the table that's an appendix to those guidelines, it recognizes that there are different definitions of low and moderate income, percentage of area-wide median income that apply and can apply for different funding sources. And we're hoping to pursue other sources with with greater flexibility than just what, for example, the Community Preservation Act can offer.
Or zoning that goes even above those percentages.
Yeah, so that it would be, and I believe that we are required to indicate, what the source of funding is for each of our in our annual reporting. Where's the money coming from? And then we could certainly say, well, and then they're applied not just to an affordable unit per se, but at what percentage, at what percentage of area-wide median income. Because and I think that we will certainly get out of the housing production plan some statement that it's not just meeting our 40B goal of 10% of having 10% of our units be countable on the subsidized housing inventory. Because to even say that 10% of them are affordable under a definition is not always accurate. Where market rates that are rented, where 25% of the rental units might be at 80% of AMI, the market rate units at wherever they are also are countable under the subsidized housing inventory. So I think there's the opportunity to identify which units, and maybe it even starts with, the question that we're often asked, how on our subsidized housing inventory, how many are affordable at what levels? And the fact is that we have a lot of units that we get to count that are market rate units, but we are allowed to count because they're part of a rental project.
But making that more evident in the housing production plan, I think is
Yeah.
one way to tackle it.
Yeah.
And labeling subset as market rate versus 60% versus 30%, I think just helps everybody.
Yeah.
The other thing I hope the plan will do is calculate what percentage of households in Greater Boston could afford a house or a market rate unit 10 years ago, and what percent can afford it now. I mean, we all know that we've lost the ability of a lot of the middle class to buy a house here. But I mean, I think we need to quantify that rather than just have a gut feeling. And I think it is quantifiable. I mean, you can take sales prices and, attribute mortgage rates and taxes and see what that means. And, you can do the same thing with rentals. So I do hope, Keith, I realize you and Michael are both on the committee, but that's a piece of analysis I really hope they do.
Yeah. I have two quick comments. One, going back to this chart of accounts thing, we might think about, in addition to sources and uses of funds, types of units that get created. So we might also include that. And every year, in the annual report of the town, there's an opportunity for committees to submit reports that are then published. And I know it's a long ways off now, but I think we should think about our submission for next year's annual report to really try to convey this information in a way that's not conveyed, I think, routinely to the town. I mean, there's the housing production plan and all that, but I think a report that sort of talks about comparative information and historical information and what we've accomplished and what's left to do, I think that'd be a great opportunity for us to really be thoughtful and helpful, I think, to the town to understand affordable housing a little bit more effectively.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. And then we'd have to see, well, we can worry about it as we get closer, but it was I know that the voters don't see the reports that we write with our recommendations on town meeting articles until they walk into town meeting. I don't know that they're going to see our town report any sooner, or might. Or
Well,
this
probably
year is the
not.
second. This year would be the second night of town meeting after.
Yeah, probably not, but I'm not so much advocating for a report that's a particular point of view about an article,
Yeah.
but sort of a statement about the state of affordable housing in Concord.
Yeah, I agree. And perhaps from a timing standpoint, we'd want to do it at the time that, selectmen are putting, warrant articles together. Finance committee is looking at funding, and, and by January seems a not unreasonable time where we would have completed the calendar year. And now it's a time to report and then sell what the information is that we've had and continually get it out there.
I think that's a good idea. And
Analysis, yeah.
maybe I would rephrase what I said by saying maybe we should produce an annual statement to the town about affordable housing. And if it gets put in the town's annual report, hooray
Right.
for us.
Right.
But we could find other distribution methods for it that I think would be useful.
We can clearly highlight that in the foundation newsletter, which does get, not everybody, but
Yeah.
we've actually talked about the possibility of paying to send it to everyone in town instead of just our traditional supporters and donors. And I think the foundation would look at doing that.
Yeah, and when I look ahead to this coming January, among the other things that will be going on at that time is the housing production plan update presumably is going to be brought to the select board and the planning board to submit to DHCD for approval. That's at least the timeline that we've seen for the housing production plan. So, we certainly have the need and a constituency that wants to hear about what the need is, and to have to make a big splash and making a report to the community. I think it would be a great service for us to do to the cause. So let's definitely put that.
Yeah, I hope we can highlight some things before it's too late. And I'll say this particularly to you, Linda. Are you aware that the Park Service is now funded to make most of their historic buildings habitable, but is saying that they're going to rent them at market rates?
Market rates, okay.
Yeah, in other words, I am hoping the selectmen and perhaps the ag committee would have a discussion. And maybe even if we had to subsidize it somehow a little bit, the idea of all those buildings, going to wealthy renters, when we need affordable housing. And the other thing is the Park Service gets a fair amount of police and fire and emergency services, those kinds of things for us that they have to provide for themselves if they were out in the woods somewhere. So anyhow, I think there's an issue we need to address now because they apparently already have the plans for upgrading.
When I was on the select board, I started a process with the former superintendent, BJ Dunn, where we were trying to explore a way that the town and the Park Service jointly could figure out how to get some of these buildings rehabilitated and then used for workforce housing or other kinds of housing. There's a new superintendent now. I have not had a chance to talk with her about this, but I do know that the Park Service received a very sizable amount of money for capital improvements and what they call are witness houses, that is houses that were standing on April 19th. So Rich, I think that's a great idea to be able to subsidize rent, so they're going to rent something for $3,000 and I don't know what it takes to make it an affordable rental, but that's something we could use our funds for. And they tend to, I've talked with Steve Verrill a number of times about workforce housing. It's one of the really critical issues for farmers in this area, is being able to be able to have housing for the staff. I know it's a serious issue for him.
Yeah, I just think it's one we need to move on because, somebody sent me a presentation. Oh, I know. I think I got it from Lisa Holder, if it was made to the Ag Committee or someone, about what they're going to do. And they're funded, and they apparently even have plans. So I think if we want to do this, there's a part of me, and it's not the trust's problem, but they also only rent the farmland on a year-to-year basis. And no farmer is going to improve land if they don't know they're going to have it next year. And they ought really to be looking at sort of multi-year rentals of both land and accompanying farms. But, I'll send the presentation to everybody. And Linda, I don't know whether you can get the select board engaged, because they go too far down the road, it'll be hard to change it.
Yeah. And Mike,
I'd be happy to reach out to the new superintendent. Rich, I don't know if you know, but my wife was superintendent of the park for some 20-some million.
Before BJ Dunn, yes, I do.
Before BJ. So I'd be happy to reach out to, her name is Simone, the new superintendent, and at least bring her up to date with what we had talked about before and our interest in this, and then get back to the committee. Maybe
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I have to think there's a package deal here where they could get their upgrades. Maybe they rent a couple at market rates, but we get farmer housing out of it. I'll send you the piece that I have. That would be great, Michael.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for getting us the information, Rich, and thanks, Mike, for taking the ball from here and see what you can find out and then report back. So thank you.
yeah, that's terrific. Absolutely terrific. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of those, outside the box, or looking for unique opportunities that are things that perhaps we can help spur action on. Just funny, I was just in the last few days been reading what's going on in some other communities. A couple of communities on Cape Cod, Chatham Affordable Housing Trust is spending $525,000 to purchase 5.25 acres from the Diocese of Fall River. 5 acres for $525,000 on Cape Cod. Wow. For affordable housing.
Is it wetland?
Well, it looked like it might be a little. It's across the street from the church, and couldn't quite tell a percentage of developable, but it was the thought that counted to engage that way, and so there are some neat things happening. And since I'm on Nantucket today, I'll just report voters of Nantucket town meeting, and then the ballot questions this year voted $40 million for housing, for affordable housing projects, including building housing for town employees and funding $10 million for their affordable housing trust. So it's
and that's without the transfer fee, Keith?
That's
just tax revenue.
That's property tax revenue and Prop 2.5 overrides, but it's an acute problem. And now it's interesting. Speaking of Nantucket, it was interesting, and not to jump ahead to other things in the agenda, but I know that we're following what's happening with the statewide legislation for the real estate transfer fee. And I was on the LOHA coalition call earlier this week. I'm not sure if others were, but Rich you could update us, Rich, on if you know that. Yeah.
The parrot is not dead, at least not yet. They pushed the date for reporting the statewide bills out of the Housing Committee back to mid-June. It had been Monday. And the individual home rule petitions are all, as far as I know, still in third reading, which means they're alive. And I know people have been writing letters. I talked to Representative Gavea and had a nice exchange with Senator Barrett's office. The piece of feedback we've gotten is that there needs to be sort of more word of mouth on the Hill, you know, of come on, why don't we do this? That if it came to a vote, it would probably pass both the HRPs and the statewide bill. But the leadership's got to think that this is something that people really want.
Yeah, and that feedback was that it's members of the House in particular who need to talk to leadership in the House, that this is important. It's not even letter writing, it's not hearing from constituents, it's that the leadership in the House needs to know that their membership sees this as important. So it's members talking to the leaders, the leadership, that's the way to go. And the questions that were being asked, what I found, the reason I wanted to mention it while I was talking about Nantucket, is that some of the questions that were being asked by legislators about the bill were very good questions. They were very specific. Okay, now if this is going to happen, how are you going to collect the fee?
Yeah, they were technical.
Yeah,
they were technical,
right.
Necessary technical.
Right, and part of the answer is, well, on Nantucket anyway, you pay the fee, you go to the town and county building in downtown Nantucket, and which has not only the town's land bank, which is a current real estate transfer fee for open space, that you paid that to the town, and then you walk across the hall to the Registry of Deeds, which is in the same building, and you record your deeds. So how do you do that where the registry is, you know, miles away from whatever town hall where you might pay it? So that they were very interested in seeing if there are ways to pay it electronically. The vineyard has multiple towns and one place to record the deed, but the questions that they were asking, from what we heard, were really good technical questions that sounded like, all right, if this is going to go forward now, how do we make sure it works? So that, and I think the answer, the most helpful answer would be that if there can be, some kind of streamlined process that's in place for, make it, you do something electronically to pay it, and then you take that to the Registry of Deeds. So those details are something that I know they're working on, and those are really good questions to ask. So hopefully something will come of that.
So just so you know, Michael smiled when he hears this. The select board did yet again send in another letter, which I wrote and sent in on behalf of the select board.
Oh, that's
Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Just looking at some notes I made prior to the meeting on the Assabet River Bluff. I just wanted to make note here that I heard there was a question and an answer on the floor of town meeting, which I was glad to hear the question, and I was even more pleased to hear the answer. It was to where one of the town meeting members asked whether the proponents would be willing to fight to get the full 5 units of affordable housing. And I was pleased to hear CHDC here, Lee Smith, respond to that by saying that they will, the CHDC will control the property and that they will put in the 5 units. And I'm writing that down in the minutes, and was pleased to hear that, answer. With
I can give you a quick update on that, actually.
yeah,
So at the most recent CHCD meeting, they actually were reviewing all of the preliminary site development activities that have already gone on in terms like soil testing, like concept plans, like sewer capacity assessment and some other things. So that they've already done a fair amount of work in that department.
well, that's great. I'm very pleased to hear that. And Lee's remarks to town meeting did go into a bit of that detail about what their next steps would be, and I'm glad to hear that they're going forward. That recall we're into that project to the tune of $650,000, for which $600,000 goes towards the acquisition of the property, and that includes the $50,000 we've already paid out for the deposit. So that $600,000 goes towards the closing schedule for July. But there's also that we've also in that total is also $50,000 to be used for project expenses. And at some point soon, we might want to discuss how is that to be a running tab, that as the CHDC incurs expenses or comes up with ideas of what they'd like to spend the money on, that they come to us, for reimbursement or something. Or, I don't know that I've seen, for example, a list of a budget, for example, on what their proposed.
So they have it. They
50,000
have it, and they've already spent the money, or are in the process of spending the money. And so I think and at some point, and they mentioned at the meeting the other day that at some point they will be coming, asking for reimbursement. But whether, it wasn't clear to me whether they were going to go straight to the finance department and ask for that reimbursement or come to us. So I think it's appropriate to request where they are on that. I think it's appropriate for us to.
So if it's all right, I'll just reach out to Lee and Liz and copy Kerry on. It would be helpful for us to have, if we could see what their budget is for that 50,000 in project expenses, and just give us. I would say I'm mostly concerned about timing.
And anticipated use of funding. Yeah.
I think
the foundation is also capable. I mean, we voted up to 100, only 50 is included in the purchase price. So if the town doesn't have money for some of the key, smaller steps forward before we can actually have a development plan, we can help out too.
okay.
This, in addition to the exact point you're speaking to, I think it's something for the committee to think about going forward, and that is what we are going to require from organizations that we give money to in terms of reporting.
Mhm.
And we should start thinking about, some type of way to respond. And this $50,000 might be the first opportunity to get that in practice.
Yeah, and I think it's a reasonable thing for us to to make sure that the applicant, now recipient, reports back with some regularity to us on the funds, and in particular if they and I think having a budget and a timetable is a good starting place, and then we can.
Yeah, and I think the chart of accounts that Michael puts together ought to enable us, to know by project, where in the process have we put money? Is it purchase of land? Is it surveying? Is it preliminary plans, and what kinds of subsidies for construction or operation? So I think, the idea that we're thinking about a reporting structure now, I think is great.
Okay, any other?
And along with the reporting structure, we had, I believe I had brought up at a previous meeting at some point that we may also want to think about a grant agreement in terms of recognition of source of funds and whatever else we think is, details. In this case, we might have included details Rich is commenting on in terms of use of at the time was called transaction cost. Remember, we said the 50,000 was for transaction costs, but then between that use of that language and town meeting, it then got translated into project costs.
Yeah.
So a grant agreement could address some of those things up front a little more, even, allowing for flexibility, but at the same time, generally identifying the scope.
Yeah, and I presume we need the kind of grant agreement that will also say, how this house can be resold to, at what level, or, the period in which it has to be affordable at a certain level, all those kinds of things that, of course, I'm only beginning to learn it, but 30 or 40 years ago, we only thought about, well, let's make it affordable for the next 30 years, but well-built houses don't go away after 30 years.
Right. And I think what we could also do is take a look at, because I don't know what the Community Preservation Committee has in place for its grant recipients, but I think that's
It's worth looking at.
Well, they have quite extensive. They go to the trouble of producing conditions. All we do is vote on them at town meeting.
Yeah.
If you're a recipient, it's kind of like the building department does. You can build a house, but you have to do these things. So they have quite extensive record keeping.
Right.
And it's just bifurcated in the sense that if it's a town project, it's more or less a email with the conditions specified. And then if it's a non-town project, which CHCD sort of falls in that category, interestingly enough, then they use the actual grant agreement in addition to the letter of conditions.
Yeah. Well, let's look at it as a grant agreement and see. Yes, Mike.
Keith, I wonder if you're familiar with other affordable housing trusts in the Commonwealth. Could we reach out to some of them to see what their record keeping stuff is like?
Sure. Yeah.
I want to reinvent the wheel if, Nantucket's already got.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And MHP, Mass Housing Partnership, is a repository of that kind of information as well. So let me.
And I think that would particularly help with the segregation of funds, so when we've got, the up to 100% funds that came in versus those that, were restricted, et cetera.
Right.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because we certainly want to have we certainly want to have some written document which puts a grant recipient on notice that we expect to see permanent deed restriction for 5 affordable units. So
I'm just thinking of trusts in general. There's I don't know what the rules are, but there must be some record keeping responsibilities.
Yes, yeah, there are, and there's a guidebook for trusts that MHP has put out as sort of an operations manual. So let's take a look at that as well.
I'll have it. So I just go on MHP website.
Yes, the housing toolkit it may be what it appears under, is
Okay.
the brand name.
But Mike, I think Keith and I sent you the report itself earlier,
Mhm.
but the tools section is helpful, so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, so that, all right, so good. I'm glad we had this discussion, and we'll look at developing a grant agreement. We'll look at record keeping, and
Keith,
reporting.
I sidetracked you earlier, but we didn't get to Article 33. I don't know if.
Yeah, I did want to get back to Article 33. Since we're talking about the money articles, let me just see if there's any other things that I wanted to be sure to mention. I think we're good there.
When you
So-
say money article, are you talking about the source of funds or?
Yeah, well, in looking, yeah, I'm just thinking for where there's yeah, use of funds is or that is to say, funding per se as the means of producing housing versus zoning as the means of producing housing. And I think we've talked through all of the.
I would just I'd like to add to the funding situation.
Sure.
I think it's going to be very difficult next year. I think we should put on our agenda early and often what other source of funds we might seek for next year. I think it's going to be very difficult to go back to town meeting for another free cash and or ARPA funds. There's an outside chance we could get a second year of ARPA funds, but that doesn't look as, we can't count on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we've never really, we had our very first meeting the day before the Community Preservation Committee's deadline for funding applications. So we missed any opportunity to even ask our own Community Preservation Committee for funding. And everybody else, all the other housing trusts in the Commonwealth are asking their CPCs for money. So I think that's.
We should be prepared this year, but to do that. But, I don't know how receptive they would be to simply a grant of funds that would go into our trust. So I think the other way for us to approach this is to be on the lookout for projects that could be funded, a rehab opportunity of a house or something like that.
Like
I haven't talked.
930 Main Street, or, if my guess is where there's going to have to be some subsidy on Assabet Bluff beyond the land. If there is, that's something else we could look at.
So,
I mean, the whole thing, obviously, some piece of it.
Very good. And since I mentioned CPA borrowing is something I know Concord hasn't done, but many other communities are doing it, and not just for housing. But that I think, and there was a workshop, the webinar series that included Concord's recent experience with housing that MHP did, included a separate webinar on how CPA borrowing can be used for as a funding source. And it doesn't cost you, and it doesn't cost the taxpayers any more than they're already paying. It simply looks at and it depends on, what well, we can have a further discussion about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're saying that you dedicate some cash flow from CPA to repay a bond, and then you have the bond amount to build the houses or buy the land.
Right, that if you want $3 million up front, you go for that and you do something big and important, and big by our standards. Big, 3 million isn't very big out there in the marketplace. but that if you needed funding that order of magnitude, you get it by CPA borrowing, and then the debt service is paid over time from the 10%
From the
minimum
annual.
that comes in per year for housing. The same is true, by the way, for any other CPA use. Same, many communities do open space purchases that way, or I've seen plenty of work done on town halls to bring them up to their historic standards through CPA borrowing. So anyway.
But you, as you said, Keith, Concord has not done that.
We haven't done it, and could be something, if we're looking at other sources of funding, it might be something to take a look at, even if the answer's still no, that they don't want to do it.
It was briefly discussed, you might recall a few years ago, the interior of the townhouse was significantly, the first floor was significantly redone. And it was discussed, it didn't get, I don't think it ever got to the select board, but it was discussed as to whether or not it might be a borrowing opportunity, but the leadership wasn't going for it. So.
Right. But if we don't have free cash and we don't have ARPA funds, and the absence of the funding won't mean that the problem of addressing affordable housing has gone away, just our ability to fix it. So hopefully we'll get good news on Beacon Hill about the dedicated funding sources that we're looking for. But we'll definitely have on our radar screen looking at other sources of funding, and do that early and often. So
because applications for CPC are due probably
September.
September, yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then on the matter of affordable housing zoning articles at town meeting, Article 33 in particular, I wanted to have a space to talk about that here, just to debrief on thoughts and insights that might have been gained by that, what happened.
Well, Keith, you were in our meeting yesterday, and we talked about it. I'm going to reach out. There was another essentially progressive Concord that also supported that zoning change. I'm going to meet with a guy who is now on the CHTC, who was one of the movers with them. I don't think the parrot's dead here. I mean, there's a number of things that I think we could do. We brainstormed and we said, well, maybe, traffic, we can do a traffic model, based on what's there and what could be there, and what's known about trips per square foot or per housing unit. All of that stuff could be modeled. The thing that some of us were thinking about was the possibility of a sub-district that would only be the Crosby's lot, which I think would reduce the historical complaints. I mean, that doesn't mean there isn't going to be opposition, but you only have to flip 35 votes to win. So I'm certainly not giving up on it. And my thought is to go to the planning board after I talk to Dan Grayson and say, what can we do to help? I mean, I think it's hard for the trust to do this, but there's no problem with the foundation sort of pushing these kinds of things.
Linda or Mike, any comments?
Well, that particular article is a kind of article that comes before town meeting with some occasion. It's very difficult because it's so easy with Concord's town meeting to organize opposition to a particular article or for a particular article. So I think it's wise not to suggest that it's dead, but But I think it will be a continuing problem to get something like that approved when the neighbors can be mobilized. I don't think I heard a single negative comment about the article, except from somebody who was in the neighborhood.
Right. But I noticed that many people said, we're not against affordable housing even here. But now some of those, that may be a cover. But I'm wondering if we can deal with some of those issues, like housing or historic preservation. You can flip 35 votes. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we'll be sort of organizing a little bit now and then going to the planning board and saying.
It must have been very disappointing for the planning board, as I know they worked very hard and long on that article.
They did. But yeah, and if it were the regular town meeting attenders, I think we would have won. It was the neighborhood that showed up for that issue and not much else.
I've seen that happen any number of times. The finance committee and the select board might be opposed to something, but I think I recall a school budget that was not in line with the guidelines, and I don't remember what the select board thought of it, but the finance committee was opposed to it, and it wasn't even close. So,
Yep.
Tough problem.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Linda?
Well, I've been in several meetings now where this has been debriefed, and I think, obviously very disappointing to the planning board. Whether they're going to have an appetite to tackle it again anytime soon is questionable. I do think that there were a fair amount of comments about difficult to present something so complicated to people who just walk in off the street and who to town meeting, who don't necessarily do all the homework that some of the committees or the neighborhood, in this case in opposition, does. So it's if there aren't strong compelling presentations that show what could have happened with existing zoning versus what could happen with this new proposed zoning, and make that user-friendly in a relatively short amount of time, it's hard to capture the people who just walk into town meeting who might be swayed otherwise. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to express? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the feedback is ranged all across the spectrum. I think the CHCD is also interested in trying to resurrect this, and was asking how can the housing groups help.
I think that's a critical issue to be discussed, that the housing groups can discuss together at the housing production plan. That's the need for inclusionary zoning, I would say, throughout the town, not necessarily just to satisfy the MBTA communities requirement of the Commonwealth around transit stations, and that requirement isn't going away. Just because this failed in Concord this time. I don't know that it's succeeded anywhere yet, and we're at MAPC, we're keeping our eye on what I know that the state is very, they're hearing the concerns that the cities and towns are having with it, the cookie cutter approach to that MBTA communities requirements not going over anywhere. And something more thoughtful is very likely to come out of the revised set of guidelines, not just for us, but for many communities to be able to do something. I think the administration has the current administration has been very supportive of for housing choice and housing, increasing the supply of housing, whether affordable or not. And I think there are some opportunities that are going to be fully explored. I hope more focusing on affordability, which I think all the communities there'll be a new standard set, a different standard set, I think, for communities to meet. And hopefully as that's happening, we'll perhaps find something that can work for Concord, because the housing need continues to exist. The very thoughtful piece in I think it was the Globe today, just about the great divide in housing, that those who own houses are under, in Massachusetts anyway, the people that are in charge of deciding who else gets to own houses, because it's not done by the state, it's done by the individual cities and towns, and granted to voters at town meeting. So it's a huge issue for the Commonwealth to grapple with, and I think unless Concord's prepared to solve all of its affordable housing problems with by spending money, then we're going to have to solve them in part, at least, through the regulatory process and having the market produce them. So we've got to. That's the great thing that we're going to have to come together and try to solve. And it's my hope that gets addressed in a very thoughtful way through the housing production plan process. So thank you all for your thoughts and your work. Just looking ahead, and we've been on the call for about an hour, and I don't want to keep folks much longer. Just looking ahead at other things on the agenda, I did want to call to folks' attention the housing production plan update process that we've had focus group meetings up till now. There is a community survey that can be filled out online. I finally filled mine out earlier this week after starting several times, and finally figured out what I wanted to say and sent it in. The next meeting of the Housing Production Plan Steering Committee will be on May 18th at 4 p.m. On Zoom. And so that's next Wednesday at 4 p.m. And anyone have anything else to say about the housing production plan? Okay.
Those meetings are not public meetings published, is that correct?
Well, it was, the last one was, as far as I could tell, that Liz Rust has been posting the meetings and was going to treat them as public meetings. So I believe that folks can join them. That I seem to recall an agenda with a Zoom link that I could click, but I don't.
What was the date of? Do you know the date of the last meeting?
Let's see. It was in April, and it was
Not the focus group. Your planning group.
Yeah, the first day, it was the launch of the only meeting we've had thus far was the Concord Housing Roundtable.
Okay.
Quarterly meeting,
Yeah,
which was
okay.
definitely posted, and for 4 o'clock it was the roundtable, and it was followed by the first meeting of the committee.
Okay.
So I know that was posted. I can't tell from here whether there's a posting yet or not, but my specific recollection is from Liz talking to us was that, she's going to err on the side of posting.
Okay, yeah,
as a public meeting.
okay.
Um, And I want to be sure, in this meeting, I want to be sure to report back to the full group about the Lexington Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee. Because I'd mentioned back in March that I had 2 speaking gigs, one to MHP, the other to Lexington, and I reported back on MHP, but not Lexington. So I wanted to be sure that folks were aware, and I've shared the meeting minutes now. They've got their approved meeting minutes of that meeting and a video, and I went and looked back, and it was for Lexington, I basically gave them I can't even say it's the short version of the MHP presentation because it ended up taking almost an hour. But when I looked at the questions that they were asking, they're interviewing a number of communities and asking how did the community pass the Affordable Housing Trust? What objections were there, resistance? How's the board constituted? Is the select board or the town manager on it? What are the goals? How does it operate? What works? What doesn't work? How did you decide what powers to include? Which did you modify? What are the funding streams? All of those were all of the questions that they asked, and I was able to answer almost all of them, I think, in the presentation that I made to MHP describing it. It was sort of I think what they might have taken away is that if you can do a one-stop shopping, you don't need to have 2 town meeting votes in successive years to accept the statute in year 1 and accept the bylaw in year 2. You can save a year by doing both in a single article if you're ready. Lexington is looking not only to establish an affordable housing trust, they're also looking to establish a nonprofit like the
Excuse me.
like the CHDC, like we have, so that there can be not a funding source or a funding entity to act nimbly, to act quickly as opportunities arise, but then a nonprofit to carry out, building projects and so on as need be. So they're looking at it holistically. And I did say that I think it works better if the trust can be part of it, if there's a master plan that you're bringing forward for not just the trust alone, but you need the trust with say how you're going to fund it, where they might fit in. We're fortunate that we've got a CHDC in place as a nonprofit, but that was basically the feedback that I was getting from Lexington. But they're looking to go forward with a trust and a community development corporation type entity to be able to move forward. So, and I'm happy to be able to report back on that. And quite recently, I've been approached by the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle. They have a DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, who's planning a 4-part adult education program for this fall on looking at community through a DEI lens. And one of the panels that they're going to have is to look at land use, zoning, and housing in Concord through a DEI lens. And Liz Rust and I have been asked to be on the panel. They'll be looking for other folks as well. And I think over the course of the series, they'll be looking at, it's a very thoughtful look at issues that I know have been raised through establishing a DEI commission in Concord. So I'm looking forward to participating in that. Is there anything else that anyone has that we want to be sure to mention. All right, it's just the four, I only see the four of us, so I will say public comment and that we didn't have any. But hello to our usual viewers. I know we're got a lot of folks who are following what we're doing, and I thank you for your interest and your support. Future meetings, did we want to pick a date for our next meeting?
Yes,
Perhaps,
please.
perhaps would a month from now be appropriate? That be all right?
Sure.
Thursday, June 9th. Does that work for folks?
Works for me.
Okay, Thursday, June 9th at 1:30 p.m. on Zoom.
Same time, 1:30.
Yeah, 1:30. Yep. Same time. Very good. All right. So, well, I think it might be the time then that we can make a motion to adjourn. Do I
I'll move.
move by
Second,
Mike, seconded by Rich, and we shall take action by roll call. Linda?
You're muted.
Linda saying aye. I can,
You can lip
She
read.
said, thank you and I.
thank you and I. Very good. Thank you. Mike,
I,
yep, aye. Thank you, Keith.
yeah, thank you.
and Keith, aye, and thank you all, and we'll see you. I'm sure we're going to be back in Concord a couple of times between now and a month from now, and hope to see you on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
Very
Take
good.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.